Off we go then. So I'm going to begin by just adding my email input and email label and styling those so that everything looks like I want it to. So I did mention that there are things that we can use called labels which attach themselves to inputs. So let's do a quick Google for something like labels for inputs HTML. Okay, the label tag, that looks like what we might want. Okay, and there we go. So looks like I can use label to just attach myself, or attach my label specifically to an input. Alright, so we've pasted that in. Let's update things. So the label is connected to the input itself via its ID. Those are the things that are matching there. So I'm going to change my label to email, and I'll write email as the name for the label itself as well. This is not going to be a radio, this is going to be a text input. We'll have the name being email as well, the ID being email, and I don't want an initial value, so I'm going to get rid of that. But I will have a placeholder, because I think they usually look nice, e.g. your name at gmail.com, something like that. Alright, let's take a look. Okay, not a bad start. We definitely want to do a fair bit of styling on this though. First off, let's change our fonts for everything to a nice sans serif font. I'll go for Helvetica and then sans serif if that fails. Oops, I've forgotten to put my style tag in there. There we go, and end that there. So that should change the font for everything to Helvetica. Oh, but only if I put a comma in between those two. Great. Next, I want to make everything a fair bit bigger. So let's try a font size of 300%. Oh, a little bit too large. 200%. That'll do. Next, I want to style my inputs. So let's add in some input styling. We'll start off with a height of, let's try 40 pixels. See how that looks. I think that's about right. It's not quite aligned correctly, but maybe a little bit taller. But actually, I also want some padding. So I'm going to put 5 pixels of padding in, and that should make it a little different. And I also want a larger font size. So let's go for a font size of, if it has a height of 40 pixels, 30 pixels. Sounds about right. Yeah, a little large, I think. Maybe 25. Okay, that looks more reasonable. I would like some rounded corners in there, so I'm going to add a border radius of, let's try 5 pixels. Okay, yeah, that's nice, but I don't quite like this sort of faux 3D effect there. So I'm going to set the border to do 1px solid grey. Okay, that's a bit neater. I don't like the centering in, the vertical centering of the text. So I'm going to get rid of that height and adjust the padding. So I like the amount of padding on the top, and I want to have the same amount on the bottom, and it's not quite centering that for me. So I'm going to go for 5px, and then let's try 15px on the bottom to give it a bit more padding there. Okay, that's good, but I think we've got a little bit too much. So let's try 10. Okay, just a touch more. There we go. Okay, I'm liking that. We do need a bit more width though. So let's try 300 pixels for our width. Yeah, maybe even a touch more. Try 320. Okay. Now I think my label is a little bit large, so I'll actually make that a touch smaller. And I also want to shift it down a little bit. It's not quite centered vertically with the input there. So I'm going to style my labels, and yeah, I should indent everything else a little bit. There we go. So we'll do this with relative positioning and give it a top of maybe 7 pixels. See how that looks. Oh, a bit too much. 4 pixels. There we go. Great. I'd like to center everything in the page. So you may remember how we do that from our big CSS project. We have some kind of container or wrapper div. Doesn't matter too much what you call it. The important thing are the styles that you give it. So let's give it a fixed width. Let's try 500 pixels initially, and then a margin, as you may remember, 0 for top and bottom and auto for left and right. And that will then center everything in the middle of the page. Okay, we may adjust our styling a little bit as we go, but let's start off with that and see how it works. Okay, so now we've got our email label. Let's add our telephone label. So we'll call it telephone. And it's still going to be text. And we'll give it a name of phone, ID of phone, and an EG of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The important thing is there's no spaces in there. So let's have a look. Okay, that looks good, but you can see that these labels have different widths. So let's try and fix that. And we should come across an interesting little issue. So if I try and set the width, not of the wrapper, but of the label to 150 pixels, nothing happens. So that's a bit of a mystery, and that's one of those things you could spend quite a while messing around trying to fix. So let's have a little look. Change label width HTML, something like that, and see if we can find an answer. Okay, how can I control the width of a label tag? That looks promising. Aha, so here we go. Label is an inline element. It cannot have a width value. In order to do this, you need to change the display type to display block or float left. So we'll use float left because we want it to appear to the left of our input. There we go. That looks a lot better. Had we used display is block, our width still would have worked, but it would have been above the input, which is not what we wanted. So let's go for floating left. And these are a bit too close, I think, now. So let's add a bit of a margin. I think it's probably worth putting them in a div with a class of something like form element. There we go. Rather than applying the margins to the labels and the inputs directly, which doesn't seem right somehow. So another one there. Form element. That also gives us a nice container for our labels and inputs as well, which feels right. Okay, and then we can take our form element divs, and I'm just going to go for a margin bottom of, say, 10 pixels. Let's give that a look. Excellent. Much more nicely spaced out. Okay, now let's add our password fields. So I'm going to copy that whole div there. For password. And we'll call it password as well. So this is going to have a type of text, but we can actually use a type of password, which will work in exactly the same way as text, but it won't display the text when the user types it. So more secure if someone's looking over their shoulder. So a type of password, name will be password, and ID will be password, and we won't have a placeholder this time. Okay, looks good. And then we might have a bit of an issue with space here. But let's see what pops up. Okay, we could do it like that, but that doesn't look particularly neat. So let's change our sizes a little bit. I'll just call this password confirm. Oops, the type is still the same. It's only the name and ID that change. And then let's do a bit of restyling. So let's look at 150%. And maybe increase the width of our wrapper a little. That's too much. Okay, and that will hopefully allow us to have a wider label. There we go. Just a touch too close there, I think. Let's make it 130% on the sizes. Great. Now we just need to adjust the label positioning. So we'll go for about 15, a little too much. Try 12. Okay, that looks good. All right, all that remains then for our HTML is our submit button. So it's a form element. So let's put it inside one of those divs. It doesn't need a label. We could use an input or a button here. Doesn't really matter. But if we're going to use an input, we need a type of submit. And then I'll give it an ID of submit button and a value of sign up. Okay, so I already quite like the styling of it, but we need to adjust it a little bit. So let's give it some custom styles. I called it submit button. So first off, it's a bit too wide. So let's give it its own width of, let's say 100 pixels. Oh, a bit narrow. 130, that looks about right. And also I'd like it to be lined up with these inputs here. So I'm going to give it a margin left of 200 pixels, should work. There we go. Brilliant. So there's our form. It's not exactly a work of art, but it's pretty neat and it does the job. Now for the interesting bit. Let's start doing some validation. So we want our validation to happen when the sign up button is clicked. So let's add that in first off for our JavaScript. So the sign up button is submit button. So let's select it in the usual way with a hash and then its name. So submit button. And we want to do something when the submit button is clicked. And that something is going to be a function. As always, I like to know that everything's connected nicely. So let's do a quick check. Oh no, something's gone horribly wrong. I've got too many parentheses there. Let's try that again. Sign up. There we go. Great, so we'll work our way down from top to bottom for our validation. So we'll start with the email, which is the most complicated. But as I mentioned, I wouldn't recommend you come up with your own email validating function. The internet's already done it for you. So let's have a look at, well, we could use JavaScript, but why not go for JQuery? Email validation function. So email validation using JQuery, that looks promising. Here we go. So we've got a very, very complicated regular expression there. I'm not going to go into the precise meanings of all of this, but you can probably just about work out that we're looking for a string of small letters or big letters or numbers or these punctuation marks and then an @ symbol and then some more small letters or big letters or numbers or a dash and then a range of potential .coms or .co.uk's, etc. If you're really into regex, you can go into that in a lot more detail and figure out exactly what's going on. But for our purposes, that will be enough. So this is a nice function that we can use to validate an email address. So let's pop it at the beginning of our code here. And we'll just spread it out a little so it looks nice. There we go. So you can see this is going to return regex.test. Now test is a JavaScript function that we haven't seen yet, so we're not certain exactly whether that's going to give us true or false, or the email address, or what. So let's find out. So we need to run this test against the contents of this HTML input, which you remember has an ID of email. So let's select it. Now we need to get its value, which we could Google and try and find out, but I think we could just guess. Maybe with jQuery we need to do dot and then val. That looks promising. So let's get its value. And remember, if we send no parameters, that implies that we want to get the value rather than set the value. So that will give us the value, and what we want is to run the function isEmail on that. And let's then alert the outcome of that to see what it looks like. All right, let's take a look. So if I click there, so false. So it looks like we're getting true or false here. Let's just put in ASDF, that's false. If we put in ASDF at asdf.com, it becomes true. Excellent. So this is looking like exactly what we need. If it's a valid email address, then it'll be true. If not, it's false. Brilliant. So we can actually put that straight into an if statement. And remember, this is going to be true or false, so I don't even need to put is equal to true. But what I do need is to test whether this is false, because what I'm interested in is getting an error here. So I'm actually going to put is not equal to, so I'm actually going to put is equal to false, because that's what I'm particularly interested in. And if it is, we want to show an error message of some sort. So let's think for a moment how we're going to do that. There could well be more than one error with this form. So what we don't want to do is alert each one or anything like that. But we do want to display every error so that the user doesn't fix one and then submit again and then realize there's another one. So the way I'm going to deal with that is to have a variable called error message, which is initially empty. And then if we get any of these errors, I'm going to add some text to the error message. And then at the end, we'll display the whole error message. That's quite a nice way round when you've got potentially lots of different things to say to your users, but also potentially none. Start off with an empty string and then add the issues in as you go. So let's append to error message, which you'll remember we do using plus equals. And we'll say your email address is not valid. And for now, just to check, we'll alert error message. Okay, let's take a look. Your email address is not valid. Fantastic. In fact, I'm going to put paragraph tags around that so that our error message will appear on separate lines. All right, so now on to the telephone number. So the validation here is we want to check if the phone number is numeric or not. And I did give you a clue at the beginning that there is a JQuery function to do exactly that. So let's see if we can discover what it is. So now we're looking at string phone with an ID of phone, and we want to check whether that is numeric or not. And there is indeed a JQuery function that we can access. Remember, using string dot to get all the JQuery functions is numeric. So if we pop .val again onto the end of that, that will test to see if the phone number that they've entered is a number. We could use a regular expression for that as well, but as JQuery has a built-in function, we might as well use that. So we actually want to check if that is false, because we're interested in when it's not numeric. So P, your phone number is not numeric. These may not be the most useful error messages, by the way. They'll serve our purposes, but you probably want something a bit more friendly. Let's have a look. Yep, so we've got email address is not valid, phone number is not numeric. But if we do put a number in there, then we just get the email address is not valid. Wonderful. Now for our passwords, the main thing we want to check here is that they're the same. So that's fairly straightforward. So our two IDs are password confirm and password. So if password dot val is equal to password confirm dot val. In fact, once again, we're not interested in whether they're equal to each other, we're interested if they're not equal to each other. So error message plus equals P, your passwords don't match. So let's have a look. If I just put two different passwords in, we get the email address, but not this one. I think that's because I forgot to put a hash in there. Let's have a look again. That's better. Your passwords don't match. And I've forgotten a closing paragraph tag as well. All right, so that's most of the validation done. The final step I want to do is introduce check just to make sure that they've filled something in each of these fields. And again, that's something that we don't really want to give them a separate message. The email is missing, the telephone is missing, the password is missing, the confirmation is missing. I want to do that all in one error message if I can. So the way I'm going to deal with that is similar to how I dealt with error message up here. I'm going to have fields missing, which is initially empty. And then if the email value is empty, then fields missing, append to that. I'm going to give it a line break, so it's going to be on a new line, and then email. Then I'm going to add something very similar for the rest. So if the phone number is missing, then the fields missing gets telephone added to it, again with a BR for the line break. If password is missing, then we add password to it, and if password confirm is missing, then confirm password gets added to fields missing. Then we check if fields missing is not an empty string. Then we add to error message the following fields are missing, and then we append to that fields missing. If you wanted, you could add a little bit of code that works out whether one or more fields are missing, so you get the correct singular or plural, but I'll just leave it like that for now. Okay, so let's have a look. What if we leave all of these blank then? Yep, we're getting the following fields are missing. Fantastic. So we should now be checking for a numeric telephone, for a valid email address, for matching passwords, and for all of these fields to be filled in. So we don't want to alert the message in that way. We want to be a bit more stylish than that. So what we'll do is inside our wrapper, at the beginning we'll have a div with an ID of error message. So that's where our error messages are going to go. And then once we've run through this whole process, if the variable error message is not an empty string, then we'll display the error to the user. So we'll do that using error message to select the error message div, and we'll set the HTML of that to error message. All right, let's take a look. Fantastic. That looks great. That's exactly the errors that I would expect. If we just add in some numbers and a couple of random passwords to mess things up a little bit. So we're still missing the email address, but the email address is also not valid and the passwords don't match. Fantastic. So just a couple of things to finish things off. I'm going to add a little bit of styling to error message. I'm going to make the text color red, and I'm going to make the font size a little bit smaller just so it looks a bit neater. So font size body is 130, so let's try 110, see how that looks. We have to make sure that it's obeying this one, and remember we've seen that if we put exclamation mark important, then that one will override any other CSS instructions. So let's have a look at that. Better, but still a bit large, I think. Let's go for 90%. Okay, I think that looks better. All right, so the final thing I want to add on is a nice friendly message if the user has finally been successful in this form. So that will happen when error message is empty. So we can just use an else here. And then let's give ourselves a success div. So success message, which is going to be pretty similar to error message, except it's going to be green. And the way I'm going to do success message, because there's only one success message, is I'm going to start it off hidden. And I'm going to put the content of the success message in here, which I'm happier with. I prefer to have the content in the HTML if possible. So you did it. Congratulations. Of course, normally we'd be redirecting someone to their logged in page and getting them to use the app or whatever service they're signing up for. But for now, we'll just show them a nice friendly message. So here, we'll take success message. Don't forget the hash. And all we need to do is show it. We could use CSS here to display it, but show is easy enough. And actually, I also want to hide error message, because we don't want those error messages still displaying. Once the user has got it right. Wonderful. So let's take a final look. So I'm going to put in hopefully correct answers to each of these. Sign up, and there we go. You did it. Congratulations. Maybe a touch of padding on the bottom there. Or margin would do as well. There we go. Better. Brilliant. So I hope you had fun with that. And as always, I hope you managed to do at least some of it on your own. We're now going to shift gears slightly and look at the JQuery UI plugin and how we can use that to create some fancy user interface elements really easily. And we'll be working towards our big JQuery project at the end of this section, which is Code Player. I'll tell you more about that later on.